Here we go. Are we live? I think we are live. At least it says we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another special AutoCrit event, this time with horror author David Sodergren. Now, David is currently in the green room. We'll bring him out in a little moment, but we noticed coming on here, I see plenty of fresh faces here with us today. So I figured I'd introduce myself first so you know where you are. In case you don't know me, my name is Gareth. I'm a ghostwriter, a story consultant slash book doctor, and the resident horror fanatic, of course, here at AutoCrit. For more than 10 years now, AutoCrit has been helping authors do everything that they need to get their books written and done while having fun. So we host an online platform, which is a bunch of tools and education for authors, where all of our members get access to technical tools to plan, write, and edit, plus a member community with we have awesome weekly club meetings where we talk about things like horror and mystery, presentations, workshops, guest appearances, just like ones today. And we also host tons of live streams, challenges, and things like that pretty much every week right here on YouTube. So if you can, take a minute just to like the video, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. And if you go back through the video, if you're new to it, the channel, if you're new to it, go back, look at some of the videos from previously. You might find a lot of stuff that you find to be very fun. Now, of course, today we are talking about horror, and that's because October is on the doorstep. So before we begin, I do have to let you know that this Monday we will be starting the October run of our Nightmare Fuel horror writing course. It kicks ass, I would say so, because I run it. It's a full 4 weeks of studying the craft of horror, where we'll have live classes, access to our weekly horror club on Wednesdays as well, and an extra special class this Halloween for everyone that's joining us. The link will be put in the chat there. I think Kevin is in behind the scenes. And you can also see it on screen there too, autocrit.com/nightmare. So check it out, see if you like it, and join us on Monday. Now, I will bring Mr. Sodergren into our discussion. Hello,
Hello.
David. Welcome, welcome.
Hi.
I hope all
Glad
that
to be
worked.
here.
Now, David, to do a quick introduction from my end for you, David is the author of a series of fantastic horror novels, including The Forgotten Island, Maggie's Grave, The Har, Night School, and some more that we will talk about as we go through this interview. But really, just to get everybody familiar with you, David, I always like to start by asking, tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into writing, and why horror. People always ask that. Why horror? Is there something wrong with you?
Yes, there is. There was never any option really for why horror. I've been absolutely, utterly obsessed with horror for my entire life. All my earliest childhood memories are in some way related to horror. What horror films that I saw on telly, or even in I say in the cinema. I remember seeing the clip. In Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, when the evil queen's walking down the steps and there's a skeleton and she kicks the skull and a spider crawls out. That's like one of my earliest memories. I love horror so much. I see sometimes people saying things like, you don't get tired of reading it, or someone posting being like, "Oh, I'm a bit fed up of horror. I'm going to read some other stuff." It never happens with me. It never happens. It's just a lifelong obsession. I guess it's hard to say which started first, whether I wanted to write books or whether I wanted to make films, because it would have been around about the same time that I started doing both. Probably about 7 or 8 years old or something, I think.
Nice.
Certainly wrote. I started off writing horror sequels to horror films that I'd seen. So things like I wrote I'm sure I wrote a Child's Play 3 before Child's Play 3 was actually a thing.
Was yours better?
It was 3 pages long. So it's debatable. It would have been about 8. I started making a series of films as well called Scottish Ninja, which was based on the American Ninja canon action films with Michael Dudikoff. But I had like a Jason Voorhees hockey mask and stuff I'd got for my Christmas at age 8. So we used that in a lot of them. So there was definitely a horror influence even within these silly little action movies that me and my friends would make. And then I've forgotten the question. Forgotten the
Oh,
first question. What was?
when did it go? When did it go from wanting to do movies to prose?
Yeah, so that was I went to film school. I did university and studied film there. And that was around the time I realized I don't actually like working with people. I much preferred being on my own, so it was fine. I managed to get through uni. I am becoming an editor, so I would just sit in my little dark, quiet room and edit for hours and hours and hours, and cutting out a frame here, a frame there, and things like that. Um, but I didn't think I would be a good filmmaker. I like a good director. There's too many people, too many people
Yeah.
asking me questions, too many people to answer to. I don't like to answer to people. I like to answer to myself only. So that's when I decided I could still make films, but just as books, and I see them as films in my mind. And I've always been obsessed with horror books and reading from a very, 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 very young age. So um, yeah.
I cannot tell you just how much your path almost exactly mirrors mine.
Oh, really?
The exact same experience. I wanted to be a film director because I loved horror movies growing up.
Yeah.
Still read, went to uni, studied film. After that experience, I remember after we made our first short film that I directed, I went on to it was the Arrow in the Head forums, if you know that website
I
for film
remember,
photography.
absolutely, yeah.
uh, the Joe Blow forums. I was on there and I was just complaining about the experience and how the movie ended up, and somebody just responded, "It's like congratulations, now you've had the Hollywood experience." I was just like, I don't want to make movies anymore. I just want to write them. So
Yeah.
moved on from there, moved into books. It's almost exactly the same. I'm walking around at like 7 or 8 years old with a full Freddy Krueger latex mask and glove.
Oh, yeah, I had that, yeah.
Wonderful.
So,
Now,
yeah, there definitely was something wrong with us.
when you start writing your own um, stories, whether, well, let's move on to the novels when you first get to there. I know this is the worst question ever, but I always like to see or hear about the genesis of ideas, where things came from, where was that initial spark? Because the worst question is, as a writer, where do you get your ideas from? Because the answer is
Yeah.
always like they just come from somewhere. I find them. But if we were to focus on a couple, let's say, the Forgotten Island and Maggie's Grave, so those two,
Hmm.
what were the kind of the sparks of the process for developing those? Where did they come from? How did you take it and run?
Well, Forgotten Island was my very first novel that I published, that I self-published. I had written one before that. It was my problem was I'd always been afraid to write because I've seen thousands of horror films. I've read hundreds of horror novels, and everything I came up with, I always thought, oh, I could trace that back to something else. I'm like, oh, I've subconsciously ripped something off, and that was really annoying. That put me off for years and years. And it was only once I actually sort of really thought about it and started to write, and I realized that yes, sometimes the genesis of certain things could possibly be inspired by something, but it was my own voice and it was totally different. And it became uniquely me. So that was after that sort of breakthrough. I started writing properly. I wrote one novel that's dreadful and it had some good scenes, but they've since been cannibalized for all my other books. So that book is now
Sure.
completely forgotten. And then The Forgotten Island was the first one that actually turned out quite well. And that one was partly, I'm inspired a lot by films. So part of me really enjoys the idea of the Italian cannibals films that were coming out late 70s, early 80s. I like the idea of them, but the actual films themselves are pretty terrible, with one exception, Cannibal Holocaust.
Hmm.
Uh, but they're mostly rubbish. And I was like, well, why can't someone make a good film out of these? So I started off with Forgotten Island being as a sort of cannibal on an island story. And then I went on honeymoon with my wife to Thailand. And as we were getting this lovely boat trip out, and we passed this island. And on the top of that, you could see a ruined or like half constructed hotel. And that was the exact point at which I was like, oh, I get it. Right. Okay. I remember turning to her on a honeymoon and saying, oh, imagine people are lost on this island and they see that, they see that hotel but then they see smoke coming and they go towards the smoke and they find this, it's a fire and it's cannibals. They're eating people. And she's just like, what? It's our honeymoon. What's happening? Um, And then that same night, we went for tea, went for dinner, and we were sitting under this big umbrella awning thing. And I looked up, and there was this giant spider, just huge spider above my head. And then that kicked off the other part of the book, which where it became a sort of combination of um, rough Italian cannibal cycles meets sort of eldritch cosmic horror. So that one did have two actual sort of key moments where I was like, oh, okay, I know what to do now. I know, I know where I'm going with this.
Nice.
Maggie's Grave was an easier one actually because it's it's based on a true story, sort of. So the Maggie's Grave that you can sort of see on the cover there, this sort of grave thing, is actually a real place in Scotland. So it's a monument to a witch, Maggie Wall, who was apparently burned there in let's see, 1637 or something. And so I went to visit that because that's the sort of thing that we do. We go and visit witches' graves in Perthshire, and I mean that at that point, I just that sort of thing just wrote itself, because who wouldn't? It's in a field somewhere, but I put it up on top of a hill because that's a bit more atmospheric, there's a bit more tension in there. But yeah, and then from there, it comes down to the characters really. After that, you get your sort of, I get my basic idea, my what the monster is or where the location is, sort of thing like that, and then it just comes down to writing the different characters, and at that point, they will sort of help you write the story just once you get the characters down, really.
Yeah, does it sit on your mind kind of actively making the thematic connection with what's going on within the story to the characters as well? Maggie's Grave, I think, is a very clear one in terms of what the quote unquote monster is seeking versus the characters' of fear of motherhood and pregnancy. It's all kind of very closely tied together. Is that something you try to do thematically within everything, or you just kind of chuck people into a situation and see what happens?
I think most of the time it just sort of the sort of comes out of the characters. In that instance, certainly, yeah. Originally, in the first version of the very first sort of outline draft thing, it didn't have as strong a sort of theme. And as I was drafting it and doing that very first one, I realized, oh wait, hang on, this has to completely change. It's like the theme revealed itself to me within there, and so I made the character whose name I will never remember because I wrote it years ago. But the girl who's a mum, she became a much, much bigger character. She got her own storyline that wasn't in the entire first draft. And yeah, it's once I realized, I tend to write half a first draft, realize what the story is, what the themes are, who the characters are, and then I go right back to the very start and sort of keep that as a bare bones, but then basically rewrite the whole thing as draft two. So draft one's usually half a book.
So draft one is finding your way to the eureka, and then rewind.
Exactly. I wish it happened because I outline everything, and during the outline you're like, okay, that seems fine, and then you start writing it, and you're like, no, that's not fine at all. It's completely wrong. But it works, it works for me. So
Speaking of outlining, how much in-depth outlining do you do? I know some people tend to just kind of bullet point this is going to happen at this point in the story. Other people that I know and work with will say chapter one and then literally kind of synopsize the chapter to broaden it out. What's your approach?
I am the latter, certainly. Yeah, um, for most of my books, I would say they've been outlined chapter by chapter, with key bits of dialogue that I've got in my head will even be in there. I mean, we're talking a paragraph, and
Sure.
sometimes it can be extremely short, but I'm certainly a fan of knowing where I'm supposed to be going. It doesn't always work because the amount of times that I've outlined something perfectly, fully chaptered, everything's there, and then halfway through the book, I've killed a character who is supposed to be in the climax, and I'm like, right, okay, and then you just have to think on your feet.
Sure.
But I definitely am more of a fan of that than what they call the pantsing method.
Pantsing.
Where you just,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was going to
yeah,
say there when you're being open to changes, it's what do they call plantsing, where you're kind of in between. So you
right.
might suddenly decide just to kill someone, but it's like I can deal with it. We'll
Yeah,
figure
yeah.
it out later.
as long as it's not the main character, you know. But certainly, I have done that with certain books. I write stuff under pseudonyms as well, and quite often with them, I'll just be like, there's books I've written where I've had a title, and I've thought, all right, great, let's do it, and I've knocked something out in 10 days, 14 days, or something. But they're not as good. Yeah.
How long does it take you generally for one of your own novels?
Probably about it's hard to say. I guess from when I start writing. When do you start writing though? Because I think about, like, there's one that I've not started writing yet, but I've been thinking about it for the last 6-7 months and sort of coming up with ideas and little scenes and characters and things. I'd say approximately a year. Let's say about a year to 18 months. But what I do is I write 3 books at the same time.
Sure.
So it's, if I do get stuck on one at some point, I'll just hop onto the other one, which is why I can. I think, is it 2021 maybe? I think I put out 3 books in 1 year, which is partly the stuff that I sort of stockpiled during the lockdown. So 5 books during the lockdown. And yeah, I was able to put them all out. But I think it's quite good practice to do a few things at once if you can, if you're not going to get confused by it, because then if you ever get stuck, you've got another one sitting there waiting. So
it
that's
feels a bit less like you've hit a brick wall when some kind of block sets.
You can pretend it's a natural conclusion and just think, well, actually, I feel like working on this one now instead.
It's actually just a switch in the track.
Yeah.
Do you set yourself any kind of working rotation or daily word goal or anything like that you try to meet when you're working on stuff?
No, not at all. I work at a day job 3 days a week, and then I write 3 days a week, and I've got one day with when my wife and I are both off, so we enjoy that together. In terms of the actual writing, no, I think as long as you do something vaguely worthwhile, then it doesn't matter how many words it is. I find that newer authors tend to get very hung up on word counts, not only just for how many per day, but for like how many your novel is going to be. Like they'll say, oh, I'm planning a 75k novel and things. I certainly couldn't work like that, because I think that way lies a bit some problems as well. Unless you're writing, I think, if you're writing traditional, if you're being traditionally published, there's probably more sort of, there's like a sort of acceptable margin for different genres of books and things, as far as I can tell.
Sure.
But if you're self-publishing, I would say the book, just make it as long as it needs to be. Don't write a great 40,000 word book and then add another 10,000 words to get up to 50 of pure filler. Just have it be 40. It doesn't matter. It's great.
As long as it needs to be.
Yeah. And, same for, writing. It's a good day for me, I think, if I could write about 4,000 or 5,000 words a day. But it depends. Sometimes you just sit down and it's just not coming at all. And sometimes, you get to a particular scene and it writes itself, and that's a great feeling. But
say 4 to 5 be a hella good day, but you're definitely a man after my own heart, because I'm always saying to people as well, as I don't get too discouraged. I think especially newer writers, when you have those days and you sit down and it's just frozen, and then you feel like a disgrace because, I didn't get 2,000 or 3,000 words today. It's like, do something worthwhile on the story, and even just planning or thinking, ideation, something to keep it moving. It doesn't have to be literally writing it.
That's it, yeah. And I mean, when I say like I write 3 days, I'm really writing 7 days a week, because it's never out of my head. It never for even a second, which can be annoying as well. But especially when you really start brainstorming a bit, you've got a great idea for a book and you go to bed and you're like, right, I've got to go to sleep. I've got to be up in 6 hours. And it's just whole scenes playing out, whole passages of dialogue. Everything's just running through your head like that. But yeah, it's all, if you're thinking about it, then that's partly right. That's part of writing,
Well, it's got to be. It's creative.
Yeah, totally.
And you mentioned there self-publishing. Of course, the kind of ignoring the rules when it comes to self-publishing. Are all of your novels currently self-published?
That's right. Yeah, every single one. Yeah.
And how's your experience been? If you can kind of walk us through, I suppose, the very first one that you self-published, have there been any stumbling blocks, disasters along the way? What warnings or teachings can you bestow in that regard?
Funnily enough, I've had a generally really positive experience. I was lucky in that things that I think are likely to trip people up, things like the covers. My wife is a graphic designer, and she teaches it. So she was able to show me how to use Photoshop and everything. And um, well, in fact, she did the design for the first 3 or 4 books, I think, up to Maggie's Grave. Yeah,
Just kind of
um,
set you up a template that's easy to run with.
yeah, yeah. My experience has generally been really good. It's hard to think of pitfalls. I
Hell, if it's been super smooth, it's been super smooth. That's it. Are you
It has.
publishing through KDP?
Sorry, yes, yeah, yeah. KDP. I tried Kobo for a while, but I found that I'm sure most of your readers, most of your viewers know this, but if not, if you've got Amazon Kindle Unlimited, where people can sign up and they read your book for free for a monthly payment. And if you're in that, you can't be anywhere else. Your ebook. So I was on Kobo for a while, and it was not a success at all. And by the time when I finally switched to Kindle Unlimited and took everything off Kobo, I found I was making in a day on Kindle Unlimited what I made in a year.
Wow.
To be fair, at that point I had 4 books out, so it wasn't like an instant, you go on Kindle Unlimited and you make lots of money. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I my regret, I think, would be is not going straight onto Kindle Unlimited, because it doesn't get you huge money or anything, but it gets you so many readers, because the amount of people that can't afford to buy lots of different books and things, they can afford a monthly subscription. That's thousands and thousands of people have read me that maybe would never have read me because I'm on Kindle Unlimited. So I think that's great. And for me at the moment, certainly that is outweighing the need to go onto any other platform. For me, certainly. I mean, everyone's experience will be different, I'm sure, but that certainly for me, it's been very successful.
I tend to hear a lot of good things, especially in the horror genre, about Kindle Unlimited. Just about everybody I've spoken to, certainly in the past few years, has always said, "Yeah, just put it on Kindle Unlimited." I know, for example, Jeff Strand is a huge, always talking about Jeff and his success. But you have to, I mean, to get the most out of it, like you say, when you've got 4 books, there's only so many reads you can get, how many pages read. But the more books you produce, the more that are on there, the more people will go from one to the next and one, and it's just like what do they call it, like a flywheel effect of
Yeah,
building readers and more income.
that's it. It's all about the back catalog, because for me, I've had some pardon me, successful books, but the one that's been the absolute huge runaway success was The Har, which was my 8th book, I think. But even then, it only got successful after I had 9 books. So when that really took off, I'm sitting on a back catalogue of 8 books. So anyone who's enjoyed that, a lot of people have said, "Oh, I went straight out and bought another 5 of your books and things." So, I'd say to people, don't expect success on your first book, and even your second, or your third, or your fourth, or your fifth, or your sixth. But keep writing them, and you never know. At one point, something might take off, and then that's when you're going to be very glad you've got a big back catalogue.
Well, it's like these days, I think well, it's probably a little easier these days. You just try to have to. Well, I shouldn't recommend this. I was going to say like AstroTurf, a book talk campaign to blow up one of your books and then enjoy.
Yeah, I was lucky in that I got that naturally. Shout out to Baker Reads, Brandon Baker on TikTok, who just posted about The Har, and that was the exact moment
Is that
that
the
everything
source of
went
it?
to the dark. Yeah,
Nice,
so
very nice.
very
Um,
grateful.
Going back to the design thing and your covers, I do have to say, because we were talking before we went live, and I said this, but what caught my eye about your books was specifically when I saw The Forgotten Island and the cover recommended on my Amazon list, just books you might like. And right next to it were two more. I think at the time, right next to it was Maggie's Grave and then Night Shoot. And all of them just spoke to me immediately in terms of the cover. And I thought, hey, I'll read The Forgotten Isle. Well, obviously, I checked the reviews first, and all the reviews were very,
Right.
very good. So I then bought the book, read it, loved it, and moved on to Maggie's Grave. But all of them have a consistent visual look. Was that something that you had in mind, or was your wife said, you need a visual brand? But they all look very like VHS cover. Is that what you were sort of going for? Because that's what got me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the video era, even before like Blockbuster and Ritz Video and things, and you had the little independent video stores and stuff, and just walking past and seeing the posters in the window and things. I would just stop and stare at them on my way to school. The poster for Death Ship or something, just like, what is this? Oh my goodness! Always been a huge fan of cover art, poster art. Like that is something that apparently they teach in school nowadays, but they certainly didn't when I was younger. I might have gone down a slightly different path of designing posters. But yeah, it's really the thing that, funnily enough, that because I started off and had Forgotten Island, Night Shoot, as you can see behind, have similar covers, and then for my third book, which was Dead Girl Blues, that went away from that style. And then I went back to it as well. And I know that there are people out there who have not bought Dead Girl Blues because it doesn't match. The spines and the
Oh, it just
covers don't
didn't
match.
catch them. But it's made to look like a Giallo novel,
Absolutely,
isn't it?
yeah. So I thought about doing an alternate cover version, which had the matching spine and matching cover, but no, I know. I love that. I love that cover. And it's meant to look exactly like the Giallo Mondadori paperbacks of the 1930s and 30s onwards. So yeah, I'm sticking with it. But people certainly seem to love the matching covers. And also just finding the right cover artist and thinking about the really important thing. I see some covers, and when you see them up close, they look really beautiful, but they're so busy that when you see it as a thumbnail on Amazon, it just looks like a mess, just like a murky mess. So it's thinking about, simple, bold colors, eye-catching, and that's what so my covers that you can see behind me there, those ones, the bottom three were done by Trevor Henderson, who is a Canadian artist who's incredibly talented. I think he's got his own middle grade book coming out now, a middle grade horror book.
Nice.
And the top two are by Connor Leslie, who I just happen to work with. It's ask your friend. If people do art, ask them. But book covers don't have to be insanely expensive. For a start, you can do all the design yourself. It might be laborious, it might be slow. You might not be able to afford Photoshop, but you can get what's that one? GIMP, is it? I think people use.
Yeah.
It's a learning process. You have to devote time to it, but you can do the design and layout and things yourself. You don't need to use those Amazon templates that are frankly hideous looking. And as soon as I see one, I'm like, okay, right, yeah. You do have to pay money for a good cover artist, but get someone who's on the way up. Get someone who's unknown. You don't have to go for the same 3 or 4 incredibly talented, but there's a few folk in the book industry who do a vast amount of the covers. And it's like, just troll Twitter, click on when someone's doing their there's like a showcase day where they all post their best thing. Just click on that hashtag, look through them, find someone that stuff sort of resonates with you, and then contact them, because people love doing covers for books. And if they've never done one before and it's their first one, you might get a wee sort of cheap rate,
Kind of cheap and enthusiastic gem.
Exactly, yeah, because the covers are so important. They're super important to me, but I think to most buyers as well. You can, readers aren't daft. They can spot a really bad cover a mile off. And I mean, yeah, I shouldn't say this probably, but my friend Steve Streda, a Canadian horror author, incredibly talented, lovely guy. We were talking for months and months and months, just on Twitter and stuff. But I hadn't read any of his books because the covers were so poor. They were so bad. And eventually I did, and I was like, oh, this guy's really talented. But that just goes to show it took months and months of being very good friends with someone for me to finally bite the bullet and buy a book with a really bad cover.
So you
So
still have to build up the courage to crack it open. Yeah, it's the old adage: don't judge a book by its cover. You know, it's true, but people still do. So,
yeah, yeah.
and
People like,
not so much coming across covers as well, but it's still on the I guess on the branding and marketing kind of side. I came across because I decided to check it out randomly one day, the Chilling app, which had like loads of stories and everything, and I
yes,
found Maggie's Grave, the audiobook, on there.
yeah.
I don't listen to audiobooks. I just find myself too distracted. But I left that one sitting there while I was doing some stuff, and I loved it. I thought the audiobook was really great. How did you, did they get in contact with you? Did you contact them? How did that whole thing come about?
They did, yeah. It was Christopher from Chilling contacted me. I think he'd read he wanted Maggie's Grave and the Har, and I, in my infinite stupidity, suggested doing Maggie's Grave first, not realizing that 6 months later the Har was going to be a TikTok viral sensation. So that's about a year away, probably. But he contacted me, and it's been very successful actually. You're never sure with these sort of things how it's going to work out, but it's there seems to be a really good app. I checked it out first. I like their content. I use the word content. Oh, that's awful. I like their stuff. Let's put it that way. I hate the word content. My one insistence was that it had a female Scottish narrator, because it's those two books in particular of mine are just so incredibly Scottish that I needed someone who was gonna understand it, get the accents right, pronounce the town right, because no Americans can pronounce Auchinmullen from Maggie's Grave. They always try. God bless them. They always try. Auchinmullen. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll go with it. But yeah, so they were very good. They sent me different narrators, and I chose one, and I listened to. I don't read my own books back, and I don't listen to them back. But I listened to the first couple of minutes. I thought she did a tremendous job of that. Yeah, it really makes me want to do more audiobooks, but it seems like a lot of work. And I'm always a bit concerned about the fact that with Amazon you can on Audible, sorry, I should say on Audible, it's far too easy for people to listen to your book and then return it and get their money back. That's what always puts me off there.
Oh yeah, I think there was that thing almost going viral earlier in the year, wasn't there? Of like return a book. It's like, what are you doing? Don't do that.
It's terrible. It's terrible. But I do want to do them as audiobooks. I want to make my books as accessible as I can to everybody. And there's people who aren't able to read a book, but they could listen to it. So I do want to I want to get more into that. I think those guys at Chilling are doing a tremendous job. So hopefully the Har will be out at some point.
Nice. Do you think it's been beneficial for drawing attention to the rest of your work as well? Just kind of having it on there for people to stumble across?
I don't honestly know, to be honest, because I'm quite hands off in that respect. So they put on Chilling. Once a month they get a royalty check, and I think, oh, cool. But I don't know if that's. I would imagine the amount of people that seem to be listening to it, that's going to have people checking out my other stuff. Hopefully, I rely almost about 99% on word of mouth for my advertising. So hopefully people are posting about it and leaving reviews and things. I've never actually. Oh, I spent £2.50 on an Amazon advert once and got nothing from it. So I think you have to spend more than that.
I'm going to grab a copy here before we get to some audience questions as well. Just give you an opportunity to talk about it. I have it on my Kindle. I don't know if the cover will show up on camera here anyway, but your latest book.
Oh, yeah.
And by God's hand, you shall die. And like I said, man after my own heart. I like the dedication. Fulci lives. I'll always support that. Tell us a bit about that book, if you can. Where did that one come from? How's it doing?
That was one where I was mucking about with Illustrator, so it's like this sort of publishing version of Photoshop for doing book covers and things. Absolutely incredible bit of kit. I love that. And I was just coming up with ideas. I had some stock art and I was throwing them on a cover and just had an idea for a retro cover. So I did that, and then I thought, well, I want to see what it looks like as an actual book. So I just wrote across the top haunted brothel. And then I thought, oh, wait, hang on. I'd read that book. I would totally read that book. So then I just sat down and then started to come up with ideas for Haunted Brothel, which later became And by God's Hand You Shall Die, which is very much an homage to the sort of splatter gore films of Lucio Fulci, City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, House by the Cemetery, things like that. That's one where the cover as well. That was an artist had reached out to me and said, "Hey, look, I've like a few years ago, it said, I'd love to do a cover for you. If you've ever got anything in mind." I said, well, I'll keep you my little list of cover artists. And then the right project hadn't come along. And then for that one, I'd seen his work and I thought, well, actually, it would work beautifully because there's a poster for House by the Cemetery that is that sort of white on black with a little dash of red, which is my all-time favorite posters. So I thought, well, this would be perfect for this guy. So he'd knocked it out of the park with that. The book, it's done all right. The problem is it came out right around the time that the Har was going berserk, so it's just been completely overshadowed. So it's like I'm looking at the sales and I think, yeah, it's all right. Yeah, Har sold 10 times the amount today, but you know what? Some hit, some don't. I tend to find that my books that are a bunch of teenagers or young people trapped by a monster sell better than when I step slightly outside. So Perfect Victim, Satan's Burnouts Must Die, they've not sold quite as well. I don't really know why that is. It's like people want pure horror and not like action horror or exploitation, 70s biker horror and stuff. And that's fine, I'm still going to write them. I write what I want to write and hope that people like it. They tend to. But it seems it's toddling along. It's going fine. I wish it was doing a little bit better, but it certainly could be doing a lot worse.
Well, say in terms of your own preferences, I'm guessing like the stories that interest you and the range within are very much informed by a lot of the 70s Italian and Euro sleaze and 80s canon movies. Is there anything particular that you're not a fan of? What that you kind of avoid in horror?
There's only one thing I would say. There's one thing I cannot imagine I would ever write. It would be a sort of demonic possession in that classic sort of exorcist type style. A little girl possessed by the devil. That holds no interest for me. I don't even like The Exorcist, I'm sorry to say. And the new film,
you're not looking forward to Believer then?
I'll go and see it. I enjoyed the guy's Halloween films up to a point. But
halfway through the first one.
Only thing. Other than that, I mean, like, yeah, I've done about. I'm just sort of working through my favorite genres. Even a bit of spaghetti westerns in there. I did a western horror with Steve Stredd from Canada, The Navajo Nightmare. And we're working on something else at the moment. Yeah, we're working on something else just now. That's again totally different sort of genre. It's going to be very cool. It's yeah. But yeah, possession's about the only thing that doesn't really interest me. Everything else, I just love it.
Awesome. And I'm going to jump into a couple of audience questions here. This one may latch on to something I wanted to ask myself as well. There was a question: when you write, do you write to scare yourself? I mean, how does it reflect your own fear? And what is your worst fear? Do you explore your own fears when going into these things? And did any of those inform that giant spider in The Forgotten Island? Because it's such a cool idea how that thing works.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, mentioned earlier about being underneath that umbrella and looking up and seeing the spider. What I didn't say was I then screamed and jumped about 30 foot to the left and just got away from that. Yeah, spiders are terrifying. I actually sort of exercised my fear of spiders while writing that book because I tended to, at the time I was working 5 days a week, so I did lots of writing at night once my wife had gone to bed, and you just, I had to look at spiders, had to Google them and really look at them and things to get my descriptions right. And I don't get me wrong, I hate them. I hate them. But definitely that was so for my first book. I think it's inevitable that my greatest fear ended up in that. Although, I would say it's pretty accurate. Yeah, that I do sort of write my own fears into that a lot of the time. So with things like, especially with the har, sort of just getting older and becoming a bit more helpless and things. That's definitely in there.
So I have seen talk of the harp. I haven't read that one myself, but I've seen looking through your books and the reviews of people saying that that one feels especially more emotionally tuned than the others. You know, it's a bit less of a like a canon film. it's
Yes,
it's
yeah,
it's a bit deeper. And was
yeah,
that
it's more like
something that
Cocoon.
was that something you were setting out to do, or did that just kind of grow from the initial idea for that book?
It kind of grew out from the idea, because I was, when I was writing it, I was sometimes a little bit like, oh, is this going a bit too far? Because I'd seen the way when I stray slightly away from horror, that maybe things don't sell as well. But then again, I didn't really care because I really loved this story, and yeah, that's definitely. I would say I wouldn't write to scare myself, but I would try and write to make myself cry. I love that. I love an emotional ending, and I won't say about. There's a few of my books have quite sort of sad or even emotional endings. You've not read some of them, so I'm not going to say what ones they
No
are.
spoilers.
Absolutely not. But yeah, I do want to. You know, I think my books aren't necessarily scary as well. I think sometimes Maggie's Grave has a few sort of bits that are scary, and By God's Hand You Shall Die as well. Definitely, that was the one where I think I tried the hardest to actually write scary scenes that will make, unnerve you. But mostly mine's a sort of brand of outlandish, outrageous, sort of crazy, wild gore and just mad concepts. The sort of thing where when I'm sitting writing it, I've just got this huge grin plastered to my face. I'm having the best time, just like, yep. And then it comes out with this app. It's marvelous. So I'd write to make myself cry and also make myself smile. That's how I
Nice.
write.
Two great emotions. I think the that goes a lot into that Spider in the Forgotten. I don't want to give it away to anybody who wants to check
Yeah.
it out, but like the way the thing operates was just so weird. Like I said, things coming out of here and it melting and stuff. It's just. Were you making that up as you go, or did you sit down and kind of design that creature?
That creature was made up as I went, and then after it got too out of control, went back and sort of reined it in a little bit and made it so it was a bit more normal. Eh, yeah, it's hard to, because I've Forgotten Island was, because it was my first book that had went through a huge differences in drafts. Like the first draft ended with this complete like ready for the sequel moment, that was just awful business. And I removed an entire subplot from that book as well. I cut 70 pages out of it, which then became a completely different novel called The Perfect Victim. Totally unrelated, but it wasn't working, and you have to be very, very, very ruthless with your books and your editing. If something's not working, get rid of it. Keep it, because it might come in handy as another book later on. But yeah, if it's not working, if you can't fix it, then just get rid. Don't hang on to it.
Speaking of editing, what's your process there? Do you have someone who edits for you? Do you self edit when it comes to the actual line, copy editing and whatnot, or what's your process?
I self edit entirely, which I know you're not supposed to do, but it works. I use beta readers, obviously. Definitely, you want beta readers, because if you don't just want you sitting down hammering something out and then just publishing it, that's probably not going to be as good as if someone else had read it first with some thoughts. So I use maybe 4 or 5 beta readers per book. Try and get a wide variety of different people, different backgrounds and things like that. And then I will choose whether or not to take on board their feedback, because sometimes they always give good feedback, and sometimes I will completely disagree and say, nope, forget it, I'm not doing that, that's silly. And sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a tremendous idea, well done. But I edit myself, so I do use an online editing app thing. I haven't tried AutoCrit, so I'm going to give that a shot.
You should, and you can.
I think I will. So I use one of those, and it's yeah, it's such an invaluable resource because I mean, you have to be good at editing anyway. I think I am a good editor. I'm extremely ruthless with myself. I'm able to look at it divorced from being the actual author of it.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important. So I use the online sort of editor to pick up the obvious, the silly mistakes, the grammatical stuff that you inevitably will miss. Even if you read over it, by the time you've finished writing a book, you've read it 40, 50, 60 times, I don't know. And there'll still be some obvious typo that you miss. So that sort of thing will pick them out. What I then do is I will sometimes use a text to speech thingamabob. Download that and just listen to that. Listen to the whole thing as an audiobook. It sounds weird because it's just horrible AI voice talking, but again, you will pick up on any little mistakes you've made. I tend to read it on my computer, on the Scrivener that I use. I then tend to read it on my phone, and then I read it on Kindle. Then I'll order a paperback and read it on paperback. And every single time you will spot something different just by virtue of it being in a different format. You'll spot something new.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't be, you can edit yourself. That's what I would say. You can. People will tell you not to, and they're probably right, but you can do it. You can.
It takes time and effort.
Huge amounts of time and effort, absolutely. And if you can afford a good editor, and I emphasize a good editor because not all editors are good. They're not. I've read some stuff that's dreadful that's been edited, but get a good editor, then yeah, go for it because they will almost certainly improve your work. But if you can't afford it, you can do it.
Yes. Pull your sleeves up and get ready. But a pretty good question here from Laurie. I'm not sure how much you could answer on this, but it was, what do you think is the biggest difference in writing horror for a book as opposed to writing for screen? Have you done a lot of screenwriting in that form?
Not a tremendous amount, actually. No, I've just written a few sort of short screenplays for like 4-minute long films, and even then, this script is more. The storyboards were actually more important than the script for those. I don't know. It's quite because writing I think some people think that writing the two is really similar, but they're vastly different because you've got a lot more sort of tools at your disposal if you're writing for a novel because you've got internal monologues and you've got the authorial voice and everything like that. Whereas a screenplay, I don't know. I honestly, that's a very good question. I would actually really like to know the answer. Perhaps you can answer it, Gareth. You've written.
I'd say one of the biggest differences is interiority. Like you say, your ability to actually go into the heads of the characters, give us thoughts, give us memories, give us all this. Because in a screenplay, you are entirely restricted to visual and audio format. Like that's it. So you're writing what's appearing on a screen, whereas in a book, we can actually go into the thoughts of somebody. Like what they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it's so true in that case where what you're writing on a screen that you're going to rely on an actor to visually emote, you can give a couple of paragraphs to in a book telling us exactly what's going on inside their head, and that's why they're emoting that way. In a screenplay, you have to set up the context entirely visually. So that's the biggest difference. But
And then actually,
storytelling,
when you make the film itself, you just need to have someone jump out and put a really loud noise on it, and there you go. There's
yeah,
Hollywood's horror factory for you.
there it is. There it is. The I saw a really good one because you can. People do tend to say that with a script you can't put a lot of voice in it. I saw a page last week from there's a new movie that's just come out called "No One Will Save You" about
Oh,
an alien
yeah,
invasion,
I
and
read.
there's a really great scene in that where the main actress gets frozen by an alien beam, and then the alien comes up to her and kind of grabs her, pins her against the wall. And one thing that I had never seen before done in a script, the writer had actually that was all described on one page with the words "she can't move," just copy and pasted for the
Oh, I
entire
saw
page,
that.
and
Yeah,
then little bits of the action that was going to occur was written in the middle of all of that. She can't move, she can't move, she can't move, and that was just wonderful. I had never seen a page like that before. It was like, yeah, that is how to get some attention
I
in the
love that.
screenwriting
Yeah,
world.
that's fantastic. I didn't actually know. I saw that page, but I didn't know what film it was from, and then I've seen a lot of people raving about that film. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Yeah,
It's good fun.
but
We had one
sorry.
question here, a bit of a personal one for you. What's
Uh-oh.
your favorite book that you've written? You can be
Oh,
honest.
that's cruel. It's my children. Funnily enough, it's probably my worst selling one. It's Satan's Burnouts Must Die, which is very much a 1970s biker exploitation action book. There's some horror stuff in it. It's very, very, very. It's about as violent and nasty as I get. It's like an actual one of those sort of ones that would get a trigger warning thing. Like it's really unpleasant, but I absolutely love it, and I wish it'd be more of a success because it's such a fun book. But I say fun; it's horribly unpleasant, but it's also fun. It might be that, and I also have a real soft spot for Night Shoot. I think Night Shoot really worked out. It's probably the closest out of all my books, the one that I had planned in my head, and how it eventually came out and was published. It's exactly as I wanted it. There was nothing. There's not a single scene or chapter or anything where I was like, oh, I just never quite nailed that, which I have in probably all my books. There's just one bit where I'm like, oh, so close, but I couldn't get it. But Night Shoot pretty much worked out exactly as I wanted. I really love that one. But I mean, the thing is, every book that I write, I wouldn't put something out if it wasn't something that I didn't really believe in and wouldn't want to read myself.
Sure.
All my books are like, would I want to read this? If I saw this, if I read this, would I like it? Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question. I would let's say Night Shoot and Satan's Burnouts. I'm going to call a tie on that. Sorry, it's kind of cheating, but
Is Night Shoot one that leans a little more heavily into suspense? Like the cover kind of gives that impression, based on all this. If you say where you're mainly going for creature and gore.
Actually, yeah. No, you mentioned this. This is the problem. Is that I wrote that book 4 years ago, and I haven't thought about it in 4 years. That definitely has some good suspense in it. Yeah. No. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, that's one where there tries to be. There's some scary stuff in it, and there's a couple of really, really, really tense moments. I won't say because you're going to read that one. Yeah, but yeah,
It's kind of holding back as they're coming. They're coming for you. The cover also, it gives me kind of Richard Lehman vibes for some reason.
Yeah.
Do you have are there any authors that kind of you think inspired your voice or the stories you want to tell? Including Lehman or any other big names.
Definitely. I mean, I will ignore the obvious one of Stephen King because while I love him and I think he's incredible, I don't feel there's a huge influence on my writing from him. The major one, and I was so pleased to see when you had your advert at the start for your for the course. You were covering some of my absolute favorite authors, including my number one and definitely the biggest influence on me, Sean Hudson.
Yeah, grew up reading Hudson.
You're doing a bit from Heathen, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a great book. Sean Hudson definitely is my number one influence. I read him far too young. Again, probably about 8 or 9. I read Spawn, about mutant abortions that kill people. 8 years old, 9 years old, read that. But that was what it really felt. While I'm Scottish and he's English, it felt incredibly British. It was just rainy. It was miserable. There was absolutely no glamour whatsoever. There was no exoticism like you might get in Stephen King or something. It was just miserable, depressing, grim, sleazy, nasty, violent. All the things that I love. I actually achieved a huge goal, like an absolute lifelong goal. Earlier this year, I was in an anthology with Sean Hudson, which was just absolute dream come true. Because nobody else. I love Jack Ketchum's obviously incredible, Richard Lehman incredible, Clive Barker, all those guys, they're all fantastic. But Sean Hudson was the one where I really felt like, okay, you can do this sort of, you can make it uniquely, it doesn't have to be American, like all the books that I was reading were always American, at that time. It just felt so miserable in the best possible sense. I love,
Miserably wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah, I've always been the trifecta of, I guess back then, Sean Hudson, Stephen Laws, and Guy N. Smith. It was just like, and any of those just feed me.
Actually, I always feel a bit bad when I say about that. I've read Sean Hudson, and it made me want to write, because I know that he says um, he read Guy and Smith, and he was like, "Well, it was so bad. I realized I could do much better than that." So whenever I say, I don't mean Sean, if you're listening, I don't mean that you were so bad. I thought I could do better. you know. Oh, I love Guy and
The
Smith. Though. He's been,
cycle repeats.
oh, they're all great. They're all great. The Crab series is certainly a fantastic series from Guy and Smith.
Yeah, just those days of I hit. Well, I don't like to refer to it as like pulp trash, but pulpy brilliance. It's just fun stories
Yeah,
for
yeah,
fun people. Yeah.
yeah. I like to think I'm trying to recapture that sort of fun vibe while also throwing in a bit more, modernizing them a little bit. It's like, slightly more diverse sort of casts of characters and things, and the politics hopefully less dated than some of these pulp novels that you read, where you just have to occasionally roll your eyes and go, okay, it was a different time. Moving on.
Okay, well, I think we're coming up on the hour there, and I do want to let you go, David, before it hits 7 and the wife comes barging in. So, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been
Um,
an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let us know where can people find you and catch up with your work and everything.
Multiple places. The best place, to be honest, is unfortunately it's Twitter or X, if you want to go by that. As Find me at paperbacks pugs, so like and but just with the N, or Instagram if you want to see pictures of my pug, who I was hoping would make an appearance tonight, but he's been chewing his toy all night. So that's paperbacks and pugs. That's the two best places to find me. Yeah, that's.
Fantastic.
I do have a website, but it's rubbish, so I'm
Yeah,
working
we'll
on
we'll
that.
we'll make sure to
And
get the links in the description and everything there. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming. And once again, just to repeat and rewind back there, we will be kicking off October with another run of the Wonderful Nightmare Fuel starting Monday. So if you want to join into that, it's a beginning to end journey through everything you need to know to write some heart-stopping horror stories of your own across 4 weeks, including a special Halloween bonus session. So it's going to be a hell of an October. I think we'll have the link, if Kevin's alive still on the other side, dropped into the chat there for everybody, and we'll pin it down below as well. But come and check out what's in store. All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody, and
thanks,
we'll see
guys.
you later.